Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today titled SSI for Children, Engaging Families for Successful SOAR Applications. My name is Pam Hine, Senior Project Associate with the SOAR TA Center, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping items to review and a quick disclaimer. This training is supported by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The contents of this presentation do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of SAMHSA or DHHS. A few webinar instructions. As a reminder, your lines will be muted throughout the entire webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for download on the SOAR website in about a week. There are a couple of ways you can download the PowerPoint slides. One way is by going to the top left of your screen and clicking the File and then the Save button followed by Document. Or the link to the SOAR website can be found in the reminder emails you received about this webinar, and you will also receive an email directly after the webinar with a link to the materials. You can also visit the SOAR website at soarworks.prainc.com, click Webinars on the left sidebar, and choose today's topic. ASL interpretation and live captioning are available to enhance accessibility. Just a reminder, to view captioning, click Accept in the multimedia pod on the lower right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. You can change the color contrast to suit your needs. We recommend high contrast for best visibility. And if the ASL interpreter box is too small, you can go up to the top kind of center of your screen, click Layout, and you can choose full screen for a larger picture. And of course, at the conclusion of the webinar, you will be asked to fill out a very brief evaluation, which we kindly ask you to complete. And finally, we will save all questions and comments until the end of the presentations, at which time we will review instructions for posing questions to panelists via the Q&A box. So purposes and objectives. So today, it is our intention that by the end of this webinar, you will learn more about how to engage children and families using trauma-informed principles, and also how to build those relationships with key stakeholders, which are critical to developing and submitting quality SOAR-assisted SSI applications for children, and also be able to access the SOAR online course, the child curriculum in particular, and SOAR for children-related tools and resources. And then we'll spend time sharing how our panelists are right now promoting racial, environmental, and economic equity for families and children of greatest need in their communities so that you can implement some of their practices in your own communities. So just to review, to reach those objectives, we'll begin this afternoon with presentations from Joan Catherine Martin, who is a SOAR practitioner and local lead with Emma Norton Services in St. Paul, Minnesota. Then we'll hear from Martha Mazoros, who's an assistant administrator and SOAR navigator with Lotus House Psychiatric Services with the Citrus Health Network in Hialeah, Florida. And then rounding things out will be Melissa Mays, who's a family navigator with the Flint Water Family Support through Genesee Health System in Flint, Michigan. And then we will follow with some Q&A as well. So providing today's welcome, we have Asha Stanley with SAMHSA. Asha?
Thank you, Pam. A warm welcome to all of you joining us today. On behalf of SAMHSA, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled SSI for Children, Engaging Families for Successful SOAR Applications. SSI for Children can provide critical support to families who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Building relationships with child-serving systems and engaging the entire family in the process is critical to submitting a successful SOAR-assisted child SSI application. Today's webinar will give you many practical tips and tools to help you better understand how to assist children and families with accessing SSI benefits. SOAR providers will share their strategies on how to engage families and children. I'd like to welcome and thank our presenters for your willingness to share your expertise with us. I will turn it back over to Pam Hine, who will be moderating today's webinar.
Thank you so much, Asha, for your welcome and supporting our webinar today. So just a few facts, just to lay a baseline with some information about some Social Security claims for children and some key concepts to think about as you listen to our panelists today. So just to let you know, about 1.1 million children under the age of 18 receive SSI benefits every year. And the SOAR TA Center has been tracking children cases for some time. So we have data, and we're very proud of our data. So SOAR providers who reported cases for children have cumulatively received 593 decisions on child SSI applications with a 72% approval rate in an average of 107 days. And again, this is several times higher than the national average in that approval rate. So again, we are very proud of that. And as you know, to establish a child's eligibility for SSI, the family must present mental health, physical health, and education records to prove disability. And children in need of SSI often face multiple challenges in accessing SSI benefits. And we are looking at disparities, which include racial, ethnic, and economic, which pose great challenges to families with accessing the appropriate educational and healthcare-related services. And we know that SOAR providers can be tremendously helpful in addressing these inequities, in helping families connect to these services. So not only do they build a winning SOAR application, but they're also connected to these systems of care for their own mental health, physical health, and education needs. And we shared some resources for you so you can dig a little deeper yourself. So now it's time to turn it over to our first panelist, Joan Catherine Martins. Joan?
Hi, everybody. My name is Joan Catherine Martins. I'm the SOAR practitioner for Emma Norton Services in St. Paul, Minnesota. Emma Norton's mission is to provide transformational housing for women and families on their journey to recovery. As a housing first and harm reduction organization, we believe that housing provides the foundation every human being needs in order to make progress on their goals. Our slogan is, "The journey home begins here," and it begins with our programs. Emma Norton Residence in downtown St. Paul provides permanent supportive housing to 50 homeless women in a dormitory-like setting. Emma's Place in Maplewood, Minnesota, has 6 3-bedroom and 7 4-bedroom townhomes that provide permanent supportive housing to chronically homeless families. We have a Scattered Sites program, which provides independent, affordable housing in privately owned rental units for formerly homeless single women and families. Our children and youth programs at Emma's Place are trauma-informed and focus on social emotional learning and addressing the achievement gap through out-of-school time programming, homework help, and extracurricular activities. But Emma Norton goes far beyond housing. Our case managers and peer support specialists work with our residents to create stability plans, identify obstacles, and make connections to ensure that they get everything they need for empowerment and healing. Which brings me to the SOAR program. Our SOAR program has been in existence since January of 2014, and I have been involved with it from the beginning. The SOAR program works with men as well as women and children, and we're real fortunate in Minnesota because Minnesota has statewide funding for SOAR. Emma Norton has a contract with the Minnesota Department of Human Services, who pays us to do SOAR in the Twin Cities metro area and beyond. Now, how Emma Norton delivers its programming is through the sanctuary model. And the sanctuary model is a treatment and organizational model that is based on an understanding of trauma and its impact on individuals and organizations. From our board of directors through our staff to the people that we serve, we all make 7 commitments. A commitment to nonviolence, social responsibility, democracy, growth and change, social learning, open communication, and emotional intelligence. Emma Norton was the first nonprofit in Minnesota to implement this trauma-informed system of care. And at its very, very basic, what the sanctuary model is that it moves the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce Nate and his son, Jager. Jager was 6 years old when I met him. He had a history of language delay and articulation difficulties, which made it very, very challenging to engage with him. He also experienced difficulty with transitions and accepting limitations, and had difficulties coping with things that didn't go according to his plans. His father, Nate, experiences generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and obsessive compulsive disorder. Nate also has a bachelor's degree in finance. He also went on to pursue a Master of Divinity at Luther Seminary. Unfortunately, due to OCD, Nate could not complete his hospital chaplaincy rotation. Nate is also a certified Harley-Davidson mechanic and has worked in several dealerships inspecting, diagnosing, and repairing Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Jager's mother experiences bipolar depression and substance use issues. Jager also has a younger sister and a younger brother. Now, Nate first had concerns about Jager's delayed speech and social interaction when he was between 3 and 4. A diagnostic assessment was done in 2016, and a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder was made. Jager was then referred to Fraser, Minnesota's largest and most experienced provider of autism and early childhood mental health services, for speech and occupational therapy, and for mental health services. Jager was also assessed by the St. Paul Public School District and has an individualized education plan through which he has received special education services since kindergarten. In May of 2016, when Jager was 4, due to poor repair, the home the family was living in was condemned and the family was evicted. They stayed at an emergency family shelter for 4 months until they received a housing choice voucher through Section 8. In February of 2017, Jager and his sister were removed from their home by Child Protective Services after Jager's 13-year-old half-brother physically assaulted his sister while babysitting. Jager and his sister were placed in foster care together, and they were reunited after 10 months with Nate in November of 2017. The children were not reunited with their mother because she still had substance use issues. Fraser assessed Jager at that time with unspecified trauma and stress-related disorder, noting experiencing homelessness, as well as moving to a foster care setting, were traumatic experiences for Jager. Jager experiences difficulty as a result of being separated from his parents. At the same time, the family's Section 8 housing voucher had been revoked due to the assault, which meant that the family might experience homelessness again. These were the circumstances when Nate walked into my office for the first time on a cold January morning in 2018. Now, SAMHSA defines trauma as resulting from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by the individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. As SOAR case managers, we don't do therapy, but our encounters with the people that we serve can be therapeutic, and they can be therapeutic as seen through 6 key trauma-informed approaches. The first is safety. Nate did not enter our SOAR program voluntarily. He was ordered to apply for SSI for Jager. Nate felt physically safe, but emotionally there was an overwhelming sense of shame and guilt and a fear that his children would be removed from his care. One of his first concerns was how long the SOAR process would take and how long it would take Social Security to make a decision. We strategized a little bit, and we came up with the fact that I would call his child protection worker, tell her about the SOAR process, tell her about how long it might take to get a decision. I also followed it up with a letter stating the same things, as well as the appointment of representation once we signed it. Nate's second concern was about his Section 8 revocation. I asked him, what do you need? And he said, I really need a housing attorney. Luckily, one of my favorite colleagues is a housing attorney with legal aid. I called him, they did an intake, and Nate had an attorney for his Section 8 hearing. The third essence of safety that Nate brought up at our first meeting was that he liked to meet in person, but he was worried about whether he had the support at home for his youngest son or for Jager and his sister when they were out of school. And what I said is, bring him along. I asked about Jager's interests, and Nate told me he liked elephants. I asked about the interests of his sister and his brother, and I developed an activity box for the kids so that while Nate and I were working on the application, the children could be occupied with things that they were interested in. The second key principle of a trauma-informed approach is trustworthiness and transparency. You know, one of the things that I know from my experience as a SOAR practitioner is that many of my clients have negative attitudes, skepticism, and mistrust of the quote-unquote system. And I believe one of the biggest reasons for this is that my clients just don't feel heard. In order to develop trust, in order for my clients to feel heard, I do practice active listening, the ingredients of which are avoiding interruptions, taking a non-judgmental stance, practicing mindfulness and being present, slowing down and practicing silence, not rushing in with solutions or information, taking in nonverbal cues, listening to understand, and validation. I also know that people are anxious about the unknown and tend to assume the worst when they're not kept informed. Transparency is my watchword. Everything was out in the open for Nate and in a 6-year-old way for Jager. Nate and I went over the disability report before I submitted it. Nate reviewed Jager's medical summary report before I sent it to 2 qualified providers for their signatures. Throughout the entire process, Nate and Jager, in a 6-year-old way, knew what was happening, why it was happening, when it was happening, and how it was happening. The third key principle of a trauma-informed approach is peer support. Now, I am not a certified peer support specialist, but I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder in 1998 due to a 16-year marriage where I was violated in every way that one human being can be violated by another. And there came a day when Nate and Jager walked into my office, and I knew that there was something very, very, very different about Jager. He was very subdued and very sad. Nate told me that his mother had said her goodbyes and that she had moved out of the family home. I just allowed the weight of that information to settle in silence. And after what seemed an eternity, I said, "What do you need, Jager?" And the reason that I said that was to encourage Jager's sense of having control over his own life. Jager said he needed elephants. So I asked him to come by me on my desk, and we went to the Seldrick Wildlife Trust website. And I showed him pictures of an orphan elephant that I foster who had lost her mother due to the ivory trade. I showed him pictures of Aruba when she first arrived at the refuge, and her caregivers would actually sleep with her because of the trauma that elephants do go through. I showed pictures of her playing soccer with her new family of orphans and taking her mud baths with them. And then I showed Jager pictures of Aruba when she was 5 years old in 2018. She had been moved to a transitional setting where she could actually go out on the Kenyan savannah and be with other elephants. And there were lots of pictures of her with her matriarch and grandmothers and mothers and aunts and older and younger sisters and younger brothers. And the reason why I showed Jager these pictures was because I know that positive experiences can help people recover from trauma. They can increase resilience. They can offer hope. The next key principle of a trauma-informed approach is collaboration and mutuality. And I hope that from what I've already said, you're getting the idea that ours was a collaboration and was entirely mutual. And that it is important to have collaboration and mutuality. Importance has to be placed on partnering and the leveling of the power differences. And we took this outside of our meetings. I met again with Nate's child protection worker. I showed her the third-party child function report. I showed her a one-page thing that I had done defining the different areas of functioning as Social Security did. We talked it over, and I asked her to fill out the form, which she did. I next met with Jager's first grade school teacher. I showed her the teacher's questionnaire that I knew that she was going to get. We went through it. We went through SSA's definitions of the 6 areas of functioning. And I said, well, you know, you can wait until you get this, or you can fill it out now, send it to me, I'll get it over to DDS. She decided to do the latter. I sent it over for her. I also met with Nate's mother, Jager's grandmother, and I helped her put together a third-party function report. And this time what I did was I switched the questions up so that they didn't sound as judgmental, because after all, this was Jager's grandmother. Again, collaboration and mutuality all the way around. The next key principle of a trauma-informed approach is empowerment, voice, and choice. Now, in the work we do, I think we all know that we do not do strength-based case management. It is usually just the reverse. But I always try to remind my clients of their strengths at every single encounter. Nate's strengths were his ability and willingness to remain open to the possibilities, and that he hadn't crumbled under the crushing weight of everything that his family had been through. By that gentle reminder at every single meeting, it shifted his focus from doubting himself to believing in himself. And he began to hold himself with grace and to embrace the imperfect moments his family had gone through. It was through this shift that Nate went from powerlessness to empowerment, where he found his voice and was able to make informed choices for his children and for himself. The final key principle of a trauma-informed approach is culture, historic, and gender issues. And I'll just say this flat out. We need to move past stereotypes and biases. We need to offer access to gender-responsive services. We need to leverage the healing power of traditional cultural connections. And we all need to recognize historic trauma. So what were the successes of using this type of approach? Well, the first is Jager's SSA application was approved within less than 60 days. It was actually about 42. With a lump sum back payment, Nate was able to buy a car. And can you imagine, for a father with 3 special needs children, how having a car where they had taken public transportation, what that meant to him? Or what it meant to Jager and his sister and brother, all of whom have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, to not have to take public transportation and have that huge sensory overload all of the time. I also helped Nate to get a personal care assistant for Jager. Jager had a lot of problems in the morning, particularly leaving the house. He needed a lot of time, he needed a lot of attention, and Nate had 3 children. But he now has a PCA, and he recently told me that I'm just like Aruba, and that was not negative. That was a very positive thing. Also, with hooking Nate up with my colleague who is a housing lawyer, they have been able to maintain their Section 8 housing voucher because Nate hadn't really concentrated on his own mental health needs. I helped him to secure an adult rehabilitative mental health services counselor, as well as a targeted case manager, and they are helping Nate tremendously. Jager is continuing to get services through Fraser, He is also getting special education services through his school. And Nate is at a point where he's attempting to establish his own business. He wants to make house calls to Harley-Davidson owners and go out to their place of residence and fix their motorcycles. Now, to conclude, because he has a voice, I want to give Nate the last word, and I'm just going to put up the slide and let you read what he said for our 2019 annual report. These are the references that I used to craft this presentation. And I've also put on here my contact information, and I invite you to contact me if you want to continue the conversation or if there's anything else that you want to talk about. I've also included contact information for SOARworks Minnesota. I would like to thank you all for your kind attention and your time. And as we say, keep soaring.
Thank you, Joan, Catherine, for that, sharing your journey with this remarkable family. I know I've learned a lot, and it will take time to process everything that you've done, but I think we're all going to be better SOAR practitioners because you shared your remarkable journey with this family. Thanks again. Now we're going to be moving on to Martha, who will be sharing her experiences working with families in Hialeah, Florida. Martha, we're ready for your presentation.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I am the SOAR agency lead for Citrus Health Network in Hialeah, Florida, and also Miami-Dade County because we do provide services all around the county. Our department is comprised of a team of 3 SOAR processors and myself. These SOAR processors work diligently to ensure the approval of SOAR applications on a daily basis. Just a little overview of Citrus. Citrus Health Network, as I said, is located in Hialeah, Florida, Miami-Dade County. It was founded in 1979. It's a not-for-profit community mental health center. And it is also designated as a federally qualified health center. Citrus' mission statement is that we are in the business of helping people. And in order to fulfill that statement, Citrus has created a total wellness approach for each and every patient. This includes ensuring that they have access to health care, medication, treatment, affordable housing, case management, amongst all other types of services. By that same idea, in seeing that we are providing a total wellness approach, it couldn't be remiss that Citrus knew that in order to ensure that the patient is able to cover their needs so they may tend to their mental health as well, they needed to also provide resources that would assist the patients in the process of obtaining economic stability in order to be able to pay for their medications and to pay for their treatment and to pay for a roof over their head. The SOAR program at Citrus started about 8 years ago with the adult population. A little over 8 years ago, we partner up with with a couple of emergency homeless shelters in Miami-Dade County, and we were the providers of the SOAR model for the application of disability for those homeless population that had a mental illness. In doing so, Citrus realized that there was a lot of benefit coming for these patients. They were, being able to have the means to be able to get housing, to be able to see a psychiatrist, to be able to obtain all their medications. And we were very successful with the adult population. So then in seeing this, and we were also providing assistance to children with psychiatric services and all other medical aspects, they realized that if it worked for adults, why couldn't it work for the children population? Why couldn't we help the children? In such a vulnerable population, because even though with the adults you have caregivers and such, the children population, sometimes are in foster care, or they have parents who are divorced, or they're separated, parents who don't know, especially in Miami-Dade County, maybe they've only been here a couple of years and they don't know how to go through the process. So it was key in allowing for this population to obtain that stability to be able to have the treatment for their own children. So instead of, thinking about what they're going to tomorrow, they would be able to have the Medicaid and the insurance and the money to be able to pay for the medication, psychotropic medication that can be very expensive. So in doing so, I think we've had a very high approval rate in the past year, even through a pandemic. And Citrus has seen an increase in children cases or children referrals in the past few months. Once children started going back to see the psychiatrist and things like that, we're foreseeing an even higher bump in how many people we try to assist. Okay. So one of the key components, or a couple of the key components I'm going to go over for the children's SOAR cases at Citrus, and I think Joan kind of mentioned it in her beautiful presentation, was constant communication. I think that if we don't have the ability to talk to the parents, to talk to the guardians, foster care parents, about the cases that we're, trying to complete and calling them and following up with them, it kind of does a disservice to the case. In a case with children, you kind of have to be more on top of the case than if it were an adult case, because adults, are a little bit more proactive on their own. Children have to rely on the parent or on the guardian to be able to provide that assistance. Open communication with the providers has also been a very key component. Being able to have that constant conversation, being able to email a doctor. One of the things that at Citrus has worked for us is that a lot of our psychiatrists, the cases that we see from children that are being referred, the psychiatrists are in-house. So we're able to communicate with the doctors. We're able to talk to them on a constant basis if we need to have the child receive another evaluation or see the doctor one more time, or try to understand what is the medication or where the doctor sees this child in terms of disability. It's really helpful to have that open communication. The same thing with those providers that are not in-house, making that network helps a lot with the cases. Proof of treatment. In the case of children, it's very important to get all the information, and that goes along with clear and consistent medical records. Having proof of that treatment is extremely important. Being able to get labs, any type of documentation that can show that the child is receiving treatment or has been seeing a psychiatrist or a neurologist or has had some type of test, help the case move along and not allow for a consultative exam. And I'll talk a little bit about consultative exams and medical summary reports as we move forward. Having multiple treatment sources. a child, unlike an adult goes to their PCP, maybe has a specialist here or there, goes to maybe the psychiatrist, but a child has, especially when they're initially being diagnosed with the different illnesses that they have a lot of different specialists. So having multiple treatment sources, having people that you can go to for different things, a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, all of those sources help make the case stronger. Constant communication, I will not finish saying communication is key, but constant communication with school and teachers. In the case of children, of school-age children, anyone that is in high school, middle school, elementary school, even being able to go to the school, pre-pandemic, being able to go to the school and talk to the teachers, the administrators was key. In addition to that, having the child evaluated for an individualized educational program or an IEP. I'm not sure if this is a form that is used or a type of assessment that is used across the country, at least in Miami-Dade County or in the state of Florida. This is the assessment that the school does to ensure that if the child has a disability, that they provide them all the resources that they need in order for the child to be able to address their disability in class. And so having access to that, having access to the teachers, the teacher questionnaire being completed correctly or having the correct information by the teacher is very helpful and has been key. And then one more thing that I did not mention, or I didn't put it in our PowerPoint, and I think I am a complete advocate on, is the fact that SOAR processors, our SOAR processors at the very least, are completely devoted to SOAR. So although, our population requires a lot of different aspects of resources, case managers and things like that, we found at Citrus that it was most efficient and we were more successful when the SOAR processor was solely doing SOAR. They were able to give the attention that they needed to the case, and because case managers have to go into the houses and do different things with the clients more so than just a disability application. If someone is just completely devoted to that, it is key in making sure that the cases move forward and don't fall through the cracks. Unfortunately, that can happen, and so I'm a full advocate for that. Okay, so I'm going to move forward to how to engage the parents, third parties, and providers. And I'm going to explain some of the challenges that we've had in the past few years, especially in the children population. And then I'll go to what have been our best practices in terms of what are the things that we've done to kind of mediate these challenges and kind of move forward with our cases. And one of the biggest challenges for obvious reasons is the availability to meet with a parent, with a guardian, with any third party, with a provider. Having the availability to meet with them. Sometimes parents get out of work at 6 in the afternoon. They're not always available because of their work schedule. Miami-Dade County is a very big county. So any short distance can mean 30, 40 minutes in traffic. And so that has been one of our biggest challenges. Language barriers. As you know, Miami-Dade County is a very culturally diverse area. And so we have people that speak multiple languages, Spanish, English, Creole, French, any of those languages. So that sometimes can create a bit of a challenge. Most of our staff speaks 2 languages, but in the case that there's a language that we don't speak, that can be a challenge. School hours, being able to reach the school before they close their office, that's been a big challenge. Inability to return supporting documentation with enough time to review. So teachers or third parties not returning the document within a certain deadline so that we can review it and make sure that everything is there. Parents and legal guardians not fully participating in the process. Sometimes when children are in families that are separated, it can become a bit of a challenge in the process. Maybe one parent wants to apply and the other one doesn't, so it becomes a struggle. And then believing that once you've provided all the information, then your side of the process is done. And when I mean your side, I mean that of the parent, the provider, or the third party. I provided what I needed to provide, and I'm done. And so it's that belief that becomes a challenge sometimes to get more information out of them. So some of the ways that we have found to fix these challenges, or to try to find ways around these challenges. First, when it comes to availability to meet, providing various options to engage, whether it's, look, you don't have to meet with me in person, or we can have a phone conversation. I can email you the documents that you need to sign. We can do a Zoom call now that we are post-pandemic and we've all learned how to use Zoom. Multiple dates and times, providing that flexibility to the parent, to the provider, to be able to communicate with them in other ways other than meeting with someone in person. In terms of the providers, we had many of our staff would go to the doctor's office if they needed a medical summary report signed, and the doctors are there seeing patients back to back. They're unable to sometimes print out a document and sign it or read it fully through. And so what they decided to do was once a week they would go to the main offices where the psychiatrists were, and they would have the doctors, they would make a little appointment with them, have the doctors read through the medical summary report and have them sign it. And that worked marvelously because you were able to have that conversation with the doctors. In terms of language barriers, always allowing for translating services if needed. I'm a big advocate. I know sometimes parents want to rely on the child to translate. Happens a lot. It happened when I was a child. I'm an immigrant as well. And so I would resort to translating from a parent, but we always try to provide that translating service because I think it's more efficient for them to be able to get all their points across and all the information that we have to provide. Coordinating the visits to school during school office hours, but then also creating networks. It's been one of our biggest ways to counteract that school hour challenge. So creating networks with the school system, the local school system, talking to the administrator, the principal, letting them know, look, we are coming here from SOAR and this is what we do, has been key. Obtaining the teacher's contact information for follow-up. When you know that the teacher received a teacher questionnaire, trying to see if you can have a conference with her so that you can guide her through it, because sometimes, there's things that the teacher might not see, and then you can kind of help her understand what the question means. So having that the contact information for the teacher is key. Flexibility in staff schedules, and I mean on our end, being able to, we had a couple of times that parents weren't able to meet with them until like 6, 7 o'clock at night, and I would say, look, come in at 10 in the morning instead so that you can go ahead and meet them at 7 o'clock at night or something like that, or allowing them that flexibility to be able to meet the parents where they at their moment. Creating relationships within the community is also been very helpful, especially with medical records. We try to create networks with our hospitals. A lot of our patients end up in the crisis units in our local hospitals. There is a local children's hospital, like 2 of them. And we provide that type, we've provided that networking aspect of things where our staff, for example, one of the public hospitals in Miami-Dade County, we basically walk up to the medical records office, we do our request, we already have a signed release of information, and they basically provide us the documentation that we need without having to wait for an email or a mailed in CD-ROM with all these different medical records. Reiterating that the process is ongoing. So one of the things that I always tell our staff is, when you sit with a parent, kind of explain to them that it's not just about signing a document and then we submit the application. It requires a lot more. That SOAR is not just completing a documentation, sitting down to sign, and that's it, and we're done. It requires more on their part. It requires participation. It requires you calling the parent or the guardian once in a while and asking them for different information about tutors or about different questions that the officer in the Office of Disability Determination may have. Those are things that are important to explain to the parent so that they don't have a false expectation that their application, is just forgotten and we don't call them. There's got to be an expectation. It's important for them to understand that. And the same with the providers. I'm constantly trying to explain to providers, what is it that we do, how do we do it, and why is it so important for them to participate in the process for this child. And they're very open. I don't think I've ever found a provider or a doctor that has never been open to assist and provide as much as they can regarding the child. And following up always with the parents, with the third parties, with Social Security, with the Office of Disability Determination. Following up is extremely important. I always say, follow up once a week at least in every case, whether it's with whomever the party is that you need to, follow up. If you call a parent and they don't answer, and they haven't called you in a week, try to call them again. So it's always about making sure that you are engaging them, that they're still there, that they know that you're still there, that they know that you're not letting go of that hand, and that you're there to guide them, to navigate through this process, to hold their hand through this process, because it is a very complex process. Which brings us to the most important part of the children's SOAR cases, which is the medical summary report. I think more so than in the adult cases, the MSR is probably the most important part of the packet. I think any child case that does not have an MSR kind of walks on that thin ice of getting denied, and I think, and I'll explain to you why I believe that. So some of the key differences for the adult cases, an adult just has to show that they're unable to perform gainful work activity as a result of their illness. Either they worked or they didn't work. So being able to provide that information is a little bit more, it's easier to provide, more quantitative. You can provide proof of whether they worked well with a boss or they didn't, if they had problems in their job, if they left their job, if they worked only a week, all of these things are easy to prove for an adult. In the case of a child, it's not about whether they worked. Most of these children have never worked a day in their life, even the ones that are a little older, that would be able to legally work. So what they have to prove is that they're unable to function as a result of the illness at the same level as another child of their age. And so that requires, when it comes to the medical summary report, it requires a very deep understanding of what is happening with this child on a macro level and on a micro level. It's the whole picture. And sometimes you have children that have straight A's in school, because they're extremely smart. You have that in different autism spectrums, for example, where they're extremely smart. They have great grades, but on the social aspect of things, it's a completely different story. And so, you have to show both sides of the coin for a child. So it's a little bit more difficult because it requires all the pieces around them, their whole environment around them, to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. In the case of an adult MSR, or medical summary report, an applicant is an active participant. You can sit down with the adult and ask them the questions and go through the medical summary interview. And they, for the most part, 90% of the time, they will provide you their whole story, and you are able to get a lot out of them. For a child, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old, and I've seen them all different ages, sitting down with them to ask them these questions might be a little overwhelming for them. They may not be able to follow. They don't understand the question. And so their participation in the process is very limited. The MSR in these cases strongly relies on the third-party input, the teachers, the school, the parents, tutors, siblings if you can, other family members, observations. I always tell the staff, let the parent know that they can bring the child so that you can observe how they act, what are they doing, and you can put it in the medical summary report, because that's key. If as a SOAR processor you've never met the child, it's going to be very difficult for you to paint a story of the child's situation. So that's very important. In the case of an adult, you don't really need as much third-party input in the MSR as much as the medical records are. Obviously you have the medical records, the doctor input, things like that, but it requires less than it does for a child. And that has been key for our cases. In the children's cases, it's important to make note of other information beyond the medical records. Their grades, their conduct in school, their report cards, any other type of record that is not medical sometimes helps paint a certain picture that otherwise the medical records wouldn't. That's not necessarily the case for adult cases. You mostly rely on the medical records for the medical summary report. And like I said, for adults, it's a very critical component of SOAR package, but I have seen cases that the adjudicating officer didn't have enough time maybe to read the MSR, or did not put it in the report that they read it, and they've been approved, versus a child case, which is a lot more complex to paint a picture, to the complexities of a child's life, their environment. How do they live? Do they have to constantly be back and forth between parents? Do they live with other siblings? Is there, all these different things that can encompass the whole picture is key. And some additional tips that I will leave you with in terms of what we've done. And I think Joan kind of mentioned it too before, reviewing the medical records before they're sent. And I say this with all the utmost respect. Sometimes, there's inconsistencies between, maybe they saw a psychiatrist 3 years ago that says something completely different than the other psychiatrist. And when I say review it, is make sure that you've read it, that you know what is in there, that if an adjudicating officer from ODD asks you, look, I see these two different pictures of the child, that you're able to address it. It's not just reading it just to read it, but understand who is it that is in front of you. It's important for you to sit in the shoes of the adjudicating officer as well. I do that practice where my staff will bring me the whole packet. I will look at the medical records and I'll say, okay, well, look, make sure that this part of the medical record is addressed find this information because this might be a problem later on. It's so important to have that practice of sitting yourself down on the other side as well and knowing that that what they're looking at and what they may be thinking ahead of what the adjudicating officer might ask is very important. Also have someone else on the team read the medical summary report to ensure that it is factual and to the point. You will be surprised that you'll skim that medical summary report a couple of times. I mean, I remember when I first started, I would write 8-page medical summary reports, 9-page medical summary reports. And now I'm pretty sure, those 8 pages are no longer, and it's 6 pages, and you learn to be a little bit more concise. Incorporate the Blue Book listing, offer to review teacher questionnaires and paperwork, offer to fax or scan records for the teachers. And last but not least, don't lose sight of why you're completing these forms. It is not just a document. I know that we get bogged down by all these paperwork that we have to do, but it's just more than that. It is that child's possibility to have a roof over their heads versus having the treatment that they need. So you have to just remind yourself of that every day. And you all have I always see this as a vocation, a public service vocation that we all have to help these children to get through. And so thank you very much for having me. That is my email address. And if you have any questions or you want, more tips or any other best practices, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark, that you reminded us how important it is not only about communication, but flexibility. I think that's something you and Joan, Catherine both emphasize. So thanks for reminding us of that, and also how important the MSR is, especially for child cases. So rounding things off, we have Melissa Mays with the Flint Water Family Supports Program in Flint, Michigan. Take it away, Melissa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Mays. I am a SOAR practitioner in Flint, Michigan, and I've had some success with child SOAR applications. I'm a family navigator at the Flint Water Family Supports Coordination Program at Genesee Health System, our community mental health here in Flint. Today, I want to talk about partnering with parents for successful SOAR applications. And number one, trust is crucial, as the SOAR process itself requires a partnership and teamwork with the applicant and practitioner, and especially with the entire family and support system for children. But what if trust is hard to come by? Let's just take Flint, for example. In my city, trust has been eroded due to layered trauma and crises, as well as economic, racial, and environmental injustices. And if you take a look at Flint, in 2019, the U.S. Census estimated there was just under 100,000 people that live in Flint. Approximately 25% are children under the age of 18. 60% of Flint residents identify as a non-white racial minority. 19.2% of Flint residents are living with a disability and are under the age of 65. And then we look at income and poverty levels. Flint has ranked at the top of the poorest cities in the United States repeatedly year after year. Our per capita income is $17,086. 39% of Flint's residents and 60% of Flint's children are living in poverty, and the national average of children living in poverty is 21%. Housing costs. The median monthly rental cost here is about $716, and about half of Flint residents live in rental properties. But even if you do own, the median monthly mortgage costs are $880. And 82.6% of all owners and renters reported living in the same home for more than 1 year. As for homelessness, the HUD 2019 Continuum of Care Homeless Assistance Programs, homeless populations and subpopulation reports that 326 households were currently homeless or in a housing program. 162 of those households included at least one child. As for Social Security, we have 15,936 disabled SSI recipients in 2019. 2,514 are under the age of 18. Now, the Flint water crisis, I'm going to make this brief. I have notes in the slides with links and everything that will help you kind of dig in if you want to dig in more. But when we talk about trust and why it is literally missing in Flint, what happened was in early 2011, and this was from the former Governor Snyder's Flint Water Advisory Task Force, and it was reported in 2016. So basically, starting in 2011, former Governor Rick Snyder expanded an existing emergency manager law, allowing him to appoint an unelected emergency manager, which took power away from local officials to fix what he viewed as a financial crisis. And in that year, Flint was placed under state control. And what that means is that residents' voices and votes and our elected officials were silenced, and trust was lost in government, agencies, and their processes in general. April 25th, 2014, the emergency manager switched our water, along with state and local officials, to the Flint River, which we had been on Detroit for over 50 years for several reasons, including, obviously, let's say, dumping and contamination issues. Almost immediately, residents started to lodge complaints with the different agencies about the water's smell, taste, discoloration, and health issues, as well as the cost. We still pay 8 times the national average for our water bills. Even our local elected city council was overturned and vetoed. Their vote was vetoed to get us back to the Detroit water system. The advisory task force shows that residents fought and were complaining and continuing to push. And after about a year and a half, former Governor Snyder was pushed to return Flint back to the Detroit water system, but it was too late. The improperly treated caustic water corroded the interior plumbing, distribution mains, appliances, faucets, and fixtures, as well as whatever trust remained in Flint. So we had a victory there where the water was switched back, but unfortunately it was too late and so much damage had already been done. President Obama declared a federal state of emergency in 2016 after our newly elected mayor at the time declared a local state of emergency. Currently, this year, Flint will enter its 7th year in the Flint water crisis with ongoing court and legislative battles, and we are still living in the I would say aftermath, except it's not over. We're still living with the long-term effects and impacts that we don't even know what we're going to be seeing in the future, but as of right now. And then you add in that we have one of the largest hepatitis A outbreaks in the country going on in southeastern Michigan. And of course, you add COVID to that, and we have just one, trauma after another. So trust, and this is what the picture I want to paint, is that it's difficult when you're working with parents and disabled children anyhow, but in cities where there have been injustices, there's been racial, economic divides, environmental racism like was declared here in Flint, it is very difficult to get families to trust you or the system in general, and for good reason. So right now what we're looking at is the Flint water crisis impact on our kids. Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha is a pediatrician from Hurley's Children's Clinic, estimated that over 14,000 kids under the age of 6 may have been exposed to lead. 3 years after the crisis began, the percentage of third graders in Flint who passed Michigan's standardized literacy test dropped 41% to 10%. Before the crisis, about 15% of the kids required special education services, but of the 174 children who had gone through extensive neuro exams, specialists now determined that 80% will require help for a language, learning, or intellectual disorder, and that is a direct quote from Dr. Mona. And then October of 2016, the ACU of Michigan filed a major class action lawsuit against the state of Michigan and local school districts over the systemic failure to provide adequate education for children with disabilities in Flint, even before the water crisis. But now it's such a stark need, and we just do not have the resources available to help the children. Now, how does it impact parents and caregivers? Obvious distrust of government officials and programs, and you can't argue that, and they have valid reasons. There's lack of assistance programs with filing for benefits. In our county, we only have a handful of SOAR practitioners, and even myself, I am not just a dedicated SOAR practitioner. I do have other cases that I work with that are not SOAR related. We have lack of assistance for collecting medical records. A lot of let's say medical, departments and hospitals may try to charge for collecting medical records. And then also the lack of proper testing for the children of Flint to assess the child's needs, hence going back to the ACLU's lawsuit. There's a massive gap in physical and mental health care supports for parents and grandparents who are also drinking the toxic water, but also need help in trying to raise children with increasing special needs. So here are a few tips from working with children from Flint, things that I personally have found helpful. First, complete the SOAR online course for the child curriculum. That is extremely helpful. There are some amazing tools there to help you. It is different than the adult process, but there's still a lot of similarities. But there's help here because, again, as we've heard, as Joan and Martha have talked about, there are different things. You can't prove that this child has been unable to work, especially at the younger ages. And then be very, very hands-on because, again, it has to be a team effort. Arrange the necessary testing for the family rather than just relying on consultative exams. What we have found, I've actually attended several with my families, what we have found is that it's a quick breeze through and it's not always, it's a very strength-based, as we had heard before, and that's not helpful in this process. So a lot of times there have been denials because of the consultative exams being, it glosses over the issues that this child is struggling with. You develop a relationship with special education instructors. Meet with them in person post-COVID, we did beforehand, or via Zoom to explain what it is that you're looking for, as opposed to just mailing or faxing over the forms. Actually talk to them and then help reduce the burden of extra paperwork on a most likely already overworked teacher, because we're seeing that a lot here in Flint. I mean, we need a lot of support for our special education workers as well. Be thorough and ready to help DDS and ALJ if it goes to the hearing stage. Help the staff truly understand how the child is struggling. And that goes, of course, with a medical summary report. You prepare it just like you would for an adult, painting the picture of how the child was before and after and how this is going to be a continued struggle for the child. Focus on how the child's impairments prevent them from learning in an educational setting and interacting in social environments as well. So it is very similar to, pointing out the differences and difficulties they would have in a work environment, but you really want to show like how they interact with other children and other instructors. And then you want to connect with local SOAR SSA point of contacts in your local SSA field office, because by doing this, we actually found that there was a Flint water urgency flag. It was quietly added as an additional prioritization along with the SOAR code. So when we put in SOAR applications, we are able to also flag the Flint water cases for children who have been exposed to the water. So that's just additional help. And of course, we never would have known that had we not been able to work closely with the local SSA offices. Now, working with parents and caregivers, this is what I pride myself in, and this is what I want to say, which is so important. We have to work through the distrust felt by parents who may have given up on the SSA process because of feelings towards government assistance programs or agencies that have failed them. But we also have to work through the perceived stigma of labeling children as special needs or disabled. We will run into that. I've had parents actually kind of get into it because one does not want the child labeled as disabled because they don't want the child treated differently. But what we have to do is explain that this is not really the time for the parent to be focused on the child's strengths, although you are happy to hear them, especially when you're painting the picture for the MSR. You want to talk about the wonderful things about this child, but you have to honestly focus on what's not going right and what they need help with. And then be very, very well versed and ready to help explaining the local supports and assistance the family could receive by qualifying for SSI. In our area, we have certain autism services and child care services. There are different things that a child will be able to get as far as support that's it's easier to get with an SSI positive, disability determination. So it does help, and it does kind of move you up if you're on a wait list. Because it adds urgency. So it's explained to them that, okay, we're finding out what your child needs, and with this, approval, yes, you'll be getting benefits, which is wonderful, but, it's for financial, but also you're going to be able to get into additional programs and, of course, search them up in your area to help your child and to help you as a parent and able to push your child forward. And work as a team with the parents to help with the massive undertaking of any SOAR application. Be honest and prepare for the lengthy and time-consuming process by gathering as much documentation and as many assessments as possible from the start. Make sure it is a team effort, because also then the parents do not feel like you're doing it all for them, you're speaking for them, you're standing there with them. And for parents that are in Flint, that is very important, that their voice and they be heard and they be a vested part of the process as well. And it helps them feel a little bit more of a sense of control in a very, lack of control situation. Help the parent keep track of all appointments and paperwork as you go, because, again, we can get lost in all of that. So imagine a parent with special needs child living in multiple crises. It is very important to help. So we have a shared calendar, whatever it is you need to help keep them up on it. I've also attended appointments with the family pre-COVID, so I could get a copy of the paperwork that day and ask questions as well if the parent is overwhelmed or if they forget. We usually have a meeting beforehand to discuss questions or write them down so the parent can take them with them to ask the doctor. And then if I can get paperwork that day, wonderful. Or if I need to come back, the office already knows my face and my name, and consents were already signed. And they view you differently when they see you as a partner with the parents, and of course for the medical success of the child, the betterment of the child. So it shows that you're not just another anonymous face at an agency trying to get them to do more paperwork. So I do have one of my very favorite success stories, and we're going to talk about a little girl named Jay. Jay is currently an 8-year-old African-American female with a beautiful smile and a fiery little temper. I met Jay and her mom in February of 2018 when she had filed an SSI application for her daughter, which was denied. She asked for my help as for trying to get an appeal or next steps or to reapply. After the SSI denial, Jay had a massive seizure. She had regressed with certain abilities such as toilet training, but also started losing being able to write. She started writing backwards. She started displaying anger and impatience at levels which were absolutely out of character. She became unable to bathe herself. So I held multiple meetings with Mom and Jay to get to know the child and the family. I spoke with Dad, Grandma, Jay's older brother, and her aunts to get a picture of Jay before and after the seizure. Mom and I began collecting updated medical records and completed a request for a hearing, because at that time, Michigan did not have the request for reconsideration level at that time, which has since changed and has been a great help. Well, we waited for the decision on being able to even get the appeal going. Jay's behavior had worsened, as did her grades in school. She was actually getting suspended for behavioral issues, which was not like her. Unfortunately, the school refused to give her an IEP at that young of an age. She was in kindergarten at this time. We did end up getting a children's educational and psychological evaluation with a local therapist and a clinician at Genesee Health System, our CMH. During this time, we also found in Jay's medical records that at birth she had hypoxia and was born with microcephaly, meaning her skull was not large enough for her brain. Both can cause seizures, learning disabilities, behavioral issues, and more. We also found that her chart noted lead poisoning in 2016. No one notified Mom at birth or during the process of the child's care. So had we not combed through the child's medical records together, we never would have caught the additional impairments, which then led to additional assessments and specialist visits. We had the hearing with the administrative law judge May 1st of 2019. We had just a couple weeks before had a neuropsychological assessment done for Jay, and the summary was not complete in time for the hearing. So I sat in at the hearing with Mom, and we let the judge know what was outstanding and the records that we were waiting on, and the judge gave us extra time, and we kept in good contact with her office, which is crucial. June of 2019, Jay was admitted to the hospital with seizures and an inability to keep her blood sugar up. As we got the records and information from all the doctors, as Jay underwent all these tests, I called the ALJ's office and gave them updates and records. Mom kept up with all the occupational therapy appointments and obtaining outstanding records, so we did keep the judge quite busy. December of 2019, the judge had asked for any final documentation, and we submitted the newest biopsychosocial assessment, and we waited. The COVID-19 pandemic slowed a lot of things down, especially struggles with hearings and all this. And during this time, Mom had been fired multiple times for taking time off to be with her sick children and getting COVID herself. And just when things seemed their darkest, we were notified that the judge had made her decision. And over the summer, Jay was approved, and the family was notified that they would be receiving installments for back benefits owed of over $10,000. Mom called me crying. It was huge. It was huge because they had gone through so much, and the fight seemed to go on for so long. But because of this, Mom was able to get into a better home and get tutors and supports for Jay and her brother, who is also special needs. So the partnership with Mom and the ALJ office and the doctors and specialists, all of this hard work paid off because SOAR works. And so that's why it's so important that we do work with the children, because there are so many doors that can open for these children who would normally struggle, and they shouldn't have to. So yes, it is intense and it is difficult, but you take it a day at a time and you stand arm in arm with the parent, the child, the family, and you can get things done. You can make these approvals happen and actually have these best case outcomes. So I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I appreciate SAMHSA for having me on. And if you have questions, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to help. Thank you so much.
Melissa, thank you so much again for your tireless advocacy on behalf of Flint families. And a little birdie just told us that you have a 100% success rate. So congratulations on that too. Certainly give yourself a big pat on the back for that. So we're going to enter into our Q&A session. But before that, before we enter into our Q&A portion, we'd just like to spend a few minutes to address with our panelists some of the issues around racial equity. We know that many of you in your agencies are beginning to look at equity, a lot. And we wanted to pose some questions to our panelists just to share what they're doing at the agency level too. So again, here's a couple questions we posed. Can you share strategies and efforts your agency or community have implemented to reduce racial disparities in service delivery? So I'm just going to throw that out to the panelists and see who'd like to discuss this a bit.
Yeah, I can. This is Joan Catherine. Can you hear me?
Thanks, Joan. Yes, I can. We can.
Yeah, the first thing that I have to recognize is that I come from the Twin Cities. I live and work in St. Paul, but Minneapolis is a part of my community. And on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed when an officer placed his knee on his neck for over 8 minutes. That event caused a tsunami. It opened the deep wound in the Twin Cities of racial inequity. And I'm not just talking law enforcement, I'm also talking about jobs, housing, being able to get to a bank and open a bank account, all of it. It also brought the aftermath of George's death right to Emma Norton Residence's door. It was a horrible thing to actually see volunteers having to put plywood over the glass doors of the building that I work in and paint signs on that plywood saying, please, people live here. It also had a ripple effect through Emma Norton. But the good thing is we do have the structure to deal with this, and that's the sanctuary model, because it addresses all forms of oppression through the core concepts of therapeutic community, safety, and trauma theory. Our most recent 5-year strategic plan, which was just enacted by our board of directors about a month ago, has one pillar, and I'm just going to read what it says. It's under engagement. And it says, we use our collective power to build collaborative communities and partnerships to achieve systemic change. I was also informed by my supervisor that the board of directors has now instituted a new committee. It is an equity committee that will be chaired by a very, very skilled and experienced individual. And when I think about that, I think about Emma Norton as being a very forward-looking organization. And as Lao Tzu said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And this is a wonderful step in the right direction. About how I use the SOAR model, I think I was pretty clear under the heading of culture, historic, and gender issues. I am always mindful about the stereotypes and the biases. I am always mindful of offering access to gender-responsive services, leveraging the healing power of traditional cultural connections. And for me, I have many Indigenous clients. I am also Indigenous by heritage, so what we do is we might smudge before our meetings. We might smudge during our meetings. We might smudge after our meetings. It is part of our culture. And we also, and I am mindful and recognize the huge aspect of historic trauma.
Thank you, Joan Catherine, for sharing what your agency is doing. Does anyone else want to share some strategies your agency or community have implemented and how the SOAR model has helped in those efforts?
I can. At Genesee Health System, we focus strongly, especially with, looking at the community that we serve, making sure that everyone is respected, that all racial, ethnic, spiritual, all backgrounds are respected, and that our clients are treated with the utmost respect. And that is also something that we focus on strongly with SOAR, making sure that our clients are a part of the team, but are also viewed as humans. They're not just a number. They're not just this person or this poor person here. But that's also when a lot of us, like myself, are peer workers. Like, that's how we got hired in, because of having to go through these type of systems ourselves, like having children with learning disabilities, physical or otherwise, having, struggled with homelessness or, poverty, and living in the water crisis. So that is something to make sure that we never talk down to our clients across the board, and that our agency is here to uplift them and for residents to be heard. So we make sure that we have a team that looks like the community that we serve, that's racially set up to look just like our community. So that way you're not dealing with, a majority Black and brown community and a majority white team. So we need to make sure that we can appreciate and understand it and actually see everyone as humans and uplift it, to not let it happen. And I'll tell you, in my aspect, I've had to use my uppity white lady voice with doctors here, because there are times that I have had pregnant Black mothers that were having preeclampsia and they were being dismissed by the OB as, you're just having headaches, you just don't want to work, that's all this is. To where I've actually had to go in and advocate brutally and help teach mom how to do so herself, because she told me, well, we were taught not to speak back to white people like that. And I'm like, well, here's what I'm going to teach you. And so that is something that we work on to make sure that this doesn't happen, because, of course, in our country, we're looking at Black mothers dying 3 times at the higher rate than white mothers, and, during childbirth. And this is just not acceptable. So we try to take these problems and all of these racial and economic disparities and hit them head on as best as we possibly can.
Melissa, thank you for passionately sharing what you're doing in your community to advocate for families. Now we're going to, we have some time. This has been wonderful discussion. We have some time for questions. A few have come in, but if you haven't had a chance to pose a question, you can type it into the Q&A panel located on the right hand of the screen. If we're unable to get to your question, we'll certainly distribute them to the appropriate panelists to answer after the webinar with a follow-up response. So no worries there. But we did have a question, a very basic question that sometimes we don't think about. Is SSI, supplemental security income, for kids income-based? Is income looked at? And I think one of the panelists, it may have been Martha, that said, first thing you do is, or I think it was Melissa, sign up for the online course. So we're definitely going to give you the link to that because you're going to get all the information about how income is looked at. I'd love the panelists to kind of chime in about that because it doesn't mean that, yes, SSI is for low-income families, but that doesn't mean no income. So can we talk about that? Because just like for adults, Social Security does look at income and resources, and for children, Social Security will look at the income of the children and the family that they're living with. So does anyone want to talk about that, how you've worked with families that may not have thought that they were eligible because they are working and they do have income, and how you looked at that and help the family see that they are eligible?
Pam, this is Martha here. We've had a couple of cases like that. And for the most part, what we always ask the parents to provide us some type of information regarding their income, whether it's a pay stub or anything like that. And then we never say no until we talk to the Social Security officer, the specific local office that we usually talk to. Or that where we're going to apply, because sometimes you may think that the amount is too much, or it's higher than the threshold, but you are often wrong. We've had many cases like that in which we thought one thing and it was something different based on what the Social Security office. So my first suggestion is always never say no from what you've seen. We always ask the Social Security office to look into it and let us know. And they are usually pretty good about letting us know if the parent has too many resources, if they qualify, if they don't qualify based on income of the parent or of the household.
Great. Thanks, Martha. That's a great response. Don't turn anyone away. SSA will let you know about eligibility based on income and run through, some information about that. Do we have some questions about funding? I believe all of you, I think Melissa works with non-SOAR applicants or has other duties too. Talk about funding. If you want to share how your SOAR initiative is funded at your agency to be able to allow you to be dedicated to making SOAR your primary responsibility. Does anyone want to talk about funding? And are you able to?
Yeah, I can talk about funding. Like I said, in Minnesota, we have statewide funding for SOAR. This is how it works. For each initial application that I submit, along with an appointment of representation and a medical summary report, we receive $750. For each approval, we receive an additional $1,800. And for each warm handoff that we do to a SOAR contracted law firm that handles ALJ appeals, we receive $250. That provides a funding source throughout Minnesota. And the funding, I don't know exactly how it works at the state level, but that is a large majority of how our SOAR program is funded. We also
Minnesota does have a grant. Go ahead.
We also have some grants for the program. I also, because I host a bi-monthly metro area SOAR provider group meeting, we have a micro grant with Minnesota's Department of Human Services where we receive an additional $5,000 a year. But I
know
Minnesota's different.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yes, you have wonderful funding sources, and we can share some more information about Minnesota funding the SOAR program statewide and also at your agency level. Because we are out of time, I just again wanted to thank all of the panelists for your inspiring presentations and wanted to leave you all with some next steps. Definitely check out that SOAR online course if you haven't taken it already. Look at developing these partnerships with the school systems and just about everyone. The panelists have been collaborating with many child serving agencies in their community. And again, review your plan, like Joan Catherine's agency has done, with how to outreach to marginalized community to ensure equitable service, and implementing an outreach program to find and enroll all SSI eligible children in your community. We know there are a lot of kids with disabilities out there who need our services. And again, feel free to contact your TA Center liaison with any questions. And if we didn't get to your question, we will package these up and get a response to you very soon. And again, take our survey. You can ask some questions in that survey as well. Again, please take that survey. And again, we just want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in a couple months for our next webinar on SOAR and equitable service delivery as well. So look for more information on that. Again, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.